Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
And this is Talking Books and Stuff, and of course we talk about books and writing and all sorts of stuff. And today with us we have retired RCAF Colonel Chris Hadfield. He's a retired astronaut, also an engineer, also a singer, a fighter pilot, now a writer, a fiction writer, this time around, of the Apollo murders. So do I call you Colonel, sir? How do I address you?
I was a colonel in the RCAF, and I was the commander of a spaceship. So some people call me by those titles. My name's Chris. If I can call you Dennis, you can call me whatever you like.
But don't call you late for dinner. So,
fair enough.
Right. Chris Hadfield's with us. Mainly we're going to talk about this thrilling new book out called The Apollo Murders. And sir, we'll start off by saying The Apollo Murders opens with a harrowing experience involving an F-4 Phantom jet fighter and a seagull. Now, I take it from writing that you have flown the F-4, is that right?
Yes, I've flown, I don't know what the exact number is, Dennis, but about 100 different types of airplanes, I guess, because, I was an air cadet and then with the Air Force, and then I was a test pilot with the U.S. Air Force and a test pilot with the U.S. Navy, and then a pilot with NASA, and then I've flown a lot of things on the civilian side. But when I was with the U.S. Air Force as a test pilot, I flew the F-4 Phantom. Big, old, great jet. Glad I got a chance to fly it. And it gave me the background to know what it was like in order to write about it for the Apollo murders.
And the F-4 runs into a seagull. We won't explain what happens next, but it's pretty scary. Now, have you ever had those kind of experiences?
Well, that opening sequence, it's the first chapter of the Apollo murders that I wrote, in fact, and we ended up using it as the prologue. It's based on two things, real world things. One is a friend of mine, a guy named Sid Burroughs, who, when he was a Cold War fighter pilot in Europe in the 50s, he hit a bird really violently when he was flying an F-86 Sabre, and it had pretty disastrous consequences, although Sid survived the crash. So I learned, I talked to Sid about that experience. And then when I was a test pilot with the U.S. Navy, flying over the Chesapeake Bay down in the United States, while I was flying an F-18, I hit a bird, but not exactly the way that it's in the book. But between those two things, it gave me the first inkling of an idea of something that might happen to the main character in my book, The Apollo Murders. And so it gave the underpinnings and sort of the comfort for me to get started writing the book. And it ended up being sort of compelling and action-packed enough that it's the opening scene.
And talking about birds and airplanes, birds are little guys. We have a whole bunch in our backyard. We feed daily, and yet they seem to cause great trouble. Looking back to that tragic snowbird incident a few years back with I'm assuming a bird got sucked into the engine, and that was that. So it's kind of odd that the biggest, most mechanically sound instruments man has ever come up with can be knocked to earth by basically a baby dinosaur.
Well, we had the Space Shuttle grounded by woodpeckers. They'd come out, and when the Space Shuttle was sitting on the launch pad with its great big thermal foam on the belly to protect it, sometimes the woodpeckers would come out and think it was some sort of big tree and start tapping their way into the thermal protection foam on the Space Shuttle. And so that meant we had to have owls out there and bird alarms and all kinds of things trying to safely launch a spaceship without interrupting the wildlife, even though it's not a wildlife preserve there. And the Miracle on the Hudson, that airliner that took off out of New York and then lost both engines, that's because they swallowed a Canada Goose down each of the two engines and lost both engines and had to glide it down. Sully Sullenberger there had to glide it to a landing on the Hudson. So birds, as a professional pilot my whole life, birds are also sharing the air with us, and you need to pay them a lot of respect, and you need to have a plan for when things go wrong.
Well, like they say, don't fool with Mother Nature. So you said earlier you've flown over 100 different aircraft, pretty much. But what was the airplane, though, you used for your first solo flight?
I was with the Air Cadets, and it was in a glider. And it was an old glider called a Schweitzer 222. I don't know when they were built, 50s, I guess. Very, very basic. Some gliders we call sailplanes because they perform so well that you can stay up for hours with just the tiniest updraft of wind. But some of them are just gliders because they're not very efficient, and no matter how strong the updraft, they're going to keep descending. And that Schweitzer 222 was a great training machine, and I very much remember even right now my very first solo, that combination of excitement and thrill and worry and fear and newly forming confidence. It was a bunch of years ago, but it was a really important day.
Chris Hadfield's with us. You mentioned you were in Air Cadets. Our son was in Air Cadets, and the kid, he's in his 30s, a buddy of our son, who we call our other son, who puts together these podcasts for us, he was in Air Cadets as well. So the cadet program, and I was in the Royal Canadian Navy Reserve, so the cadet program in Canada, it maybe should be promoted a bit more than it is, do you think?
I promote it a lot. It's a terrific program for young Canadian citizens, teaching them about leadership, about self-discipline, about citizenship of the country, and then teaching them useful skills for life, including, depending within the Army or the Navy or the Air Cadets, the type of things that each of those three organizations does. But I wanted to be an astronaut, Dennis, and so I knew that astronauts fly in space, so it'd be good if I learned how to fly. So that's, even when I was 13 years old, like your son and his buddy, that's what was in the back of my mind. Yes, I'm 13, but I'm joining the Air Cadets because they might teach me to fly for free, and flying is just one step on the long path to maybe flying in space.
We're talking with Chris Hadfield about the Apollo murders. Now, later in the book, Chris, one of the characters has a not too pleasant experience with a helicopter. He doesn't like them. But what about you? Do you like helicopters or not?
Well, as a test pilot, I've flown several different types of helicopters, so it was never my profession. When you're going through Moose Jaw there in Saskatchewan, as a fledgling Air Force pilot, somebody has to choose which airplane or aircraft you're going to go fly. And at some point you kind of take a fork in the road. You're going to go to helicopters, to rotary wings, or to airplanes, to fixed wings. And I always thought that if I want to be an astronaut, then I need to be the top end fighter pilot, because that's the most demanding flying that gets recognized. And so I always set my sights on flying fixed wing, being a fighter pilot in defense of Canada. And I was a Cold War combat pilot with an armed F-18 intercepting Soviet bombers off the East Coast. So I did my part. But some of my classmates were just absolutely hell-bent on being helicopter pilots, like Will Groten, his family from Alberta, and Will went on to be a search and rescue helicopter pilot and loved that life as well. So, it's a matter of what you want to do. But once you become a helicopter pilot, then of course you disdain fighter pilots. And if you're a fighter pilot, you disdain helicopter pilots. It's like joining a sports team or something.
It's like Montreal Canadiens and Toronto Maple Leafs, and I'm on the Habs side, so yeah, I know what you mean.
But I'm on the Leafs side. Well, how are those Habs doing?
There you go. Habs are not doing very well.
They are not.
They are not. So, you've flown a number of true space missions, as you say. You write about a fictional one in the Apollo murders with some conflicts that end up on the moon. But did you ever suffer from space adaptation syndrome and the symptoms? And my son wants to know the answer to this question. And how did you recover?
Sure. Space adaptation syndrome. It's one of those nice, big medical NASA kind of words. What it means is throwing up because of motion, right? Motion sickness, like car sickness.
Yep.
And the reason it's pretty simple for you and your son, Dennis, the reason it's simple, it's that there's motion happening that doesn't agree with what your eyes are showing you. Like if you're in the bottom of a ship your inner ear, your balance system, it can feel the ship rolling and knows that there's weird motion going on. But your eyes, they just tell you that you're sitting on a chair in a room. And when and it happens on a spaceship, like your eyes tell you that you're in a spaceship, but your inner ear says you're falling and you're weightless. And whenever your body can't figure out why your eyes and your balance system are radically disagreeing, well, for the last, 100,000 years, the only thing that could have caused that was if you had eaten some sort of bad root or something that was now a neurotoxin that was somehow getting into your neurological system and screwing up either your vision or your balance system or both. And so what is the good instinctive reaction to ingesting a neurotoxin? Throw up. Get that stuff out of you because it's killing you, whatever it is. And so your body just drops to a very preventive reflex and tries to make you throw up. And the next thing it makes you try to do is go to sleep. You know, it makes you feel tired because you need to stop metabolizing it so fast because it's killing you. So, that's worked for hundreds of years until we invented ships and airplanes and rocket ships when it doesn't make sense anymore. So, pretty much everybody gets motion sick in a spaceship, but we need to fly it. We're the crew. So we take anti-nausea meds. We've learned since the Apollo days. And there are anti-nausea meds you can take now that don't make you drowsy. So we take those. It's phenergan mixed with dexedrine or scopolamine mixed with dexedrine. So we take Scopedex or Fendex, and they do a pretty good job of quelling the sort of involuntary nausea and letting you function and continue to work and fly the spaceship.
Well, I wasn't
I felt sick, but it was kept under control with the nausea meds.
I wasn't a very good sailor. I get seasick on a backyard swing, so that wasn't the life for me. But speaking of outer space, there's this new fad with rich people, space tourism. Good, bad, or are you indifferent to that?
Yeah, the way you expressed it is completely wrong, Dennis. It's not a fad, and it's not a fad with rich people. What it is we have invented an absolutely unprecedentedly safe and cheap ability to leave Earth. That's what's changed. And it applies to putting up GPS satellites. It applies to putting up, the James Webb Telescope. It applies to all of the things like getting Starlink from orbit, or where you can get the internet just without having to, build towers and dig holes all around the world. And so it's a tremendous new capability, and it's opening up billions and billions of dollars of business in order to take advantage of the high ground to improve life on Earth. So to me, that's a really interesting new technological development. And then one of the tiny little spin-offs is that if you can make it cheap enough and safe enough, then maybe you can start taking passengers who are willing to take that risk. And that's going on to a very small degree. But everyone everyone gets focused on gossip and big polarizing figures, like Howard Hughes or any of the big Henry Ford or some of the big really divisive industry kind of people, or in our current day right now, Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or somebody. And everybody focuses on them, but that's going on, but you're missing the point. The point is, we've, gone from propellers to jets. We've gone from sail to steam. This is a big technological change that opens up opportunity like we've never seen it before. And we got to get it regulated right. We need to get it integrated reasonably into society. But all of the alarmist, gossipy, clicking noises of the tongue and everything, I mean, they're entertaining and fun, but they're missing what's actually going on in the world around us.
Well, true. I mean, look back 30 years, a handheld calculator cost you $100, and now I've got a cell phone that I can do anything and more stuff than the Apollo 13 mission had. So, I understand what you're saying. I stand corrected, sir. Thank you very much. Chris Hadfield, here's a tricky one somebody wants to know. What is the best piece of career advice you did not take?
Best piece of career advice I did not take. Gosh, I don't know. Probably buy Tesla stock. But no, that's a silly answer. I try to listen whenever anybody that knows something more than I do, whenever they're willing to teach me something, I've always made it my lifelong policy to try and learn from them. You know, it doesn't matter how old they are. They could be 3 years old or they could be 93. If they are expert in something that I don't know anything about, then here's a free lesson, and try and learn from it and make it part of what I'm doing. And so I try not to discount good advice. I try and work it into, you know, I'm imperfect. I can't do everything the way I want to, and I make mistakes, but I try and work in good advice into everything that I'm doing. And most of the really good advice I've gotten, I think, over the years has come from my wife. We've been together for 46 years and know each other very well. And she knows me super well and is very frank with, you know, what I'm doing great and what I'm doing terribly. And I think we've given each other really good advice over the years. And I think we've done a pretty reasonable job of honoring it. So I can't think of anything offhand where someone gave me clear advice and I chose to ignore it to my own detriment. I'm not sure that that's happened.
And that's good. We should listen to, like you say, everybody, even from our 3-year-old grandson who can paint better than I think most of the masters ever can. Of course, we're biased. But back to writing The Apollo Murders was your first book of fiction, and you've been quoted as saying in the past, the more you know, the less you fear. Is that true even when you're writing a fiction book? Did you still find that to be true?
Sure. Yeah, the greatest antidote for fear is competence. You know, it's very scary to ride a bicycle when you're 4 years old because you don't know how, and you don't know how to balance right, and you don't know you're going to fall down and hurt yourself. But as soon as someone shows you, and you get to watch other people do it, and someone puts their hand on the back of the banana seat and guides you and gets you going, and you make mistakes, but they control so you don't get damaged, you don't get injured during your falls. But eventually comes that day when your feet are on the pedals and your hands are moving. You're wobbly, but still you're doing it, and you're biking. You're riding a bike on your own, and now you're away. And you like riding a bike, right? And now you get all the exhilaration and the freedom and the speed and the accomplishment, and you know how to do this thing. And it is no longer scary, but the danger didn't change at all. The only thing that changed was your competence, your skill, your learned ability. And it opens up whole new worlds to you. And that applies to flying a rocket ship or an F-18. It applies to writing a book. I mean, everybody, when they write their first book, they're in the 4-year-old bike riding stage. They know how to move their arms and how to move their legs, but they don't know how to move them this way. They don't know how to do this thing. And they may turn out to be a lousy bike rider, or they might be in the Cirque du Soleil. You never know what your own particular talents are. But everybody can write. You know, you just have to decide how much work you're going to put into becoming good at it, and then what you're going to write about and what else you want to do in your life. And so in my case, I just made a study of it, just like I did everything else that I've done in my life. How do the good people do it? Learn from them, do a deep study of them, take the courses, work with the experts, and then start doing it. It was one of the science fiction authors who said, nobody can write 500 bad short stories. Right. If you're going to go through the effort of actually writing 500 short stories, somewhere in the high hundreds, you're going to get good at it. And the stories, or at least they're going to get a lot better. So you need to do the study, but you also need to just get at it and ride that bike over and over and over again until eventually, you're as good at it as you can possibly make yourself. And that's how I found novel writing to be. Same basic idea.
Chris Hadfield, you say in the book that your wife built the writing desk you used to write the book. Is that true? You're kidding us, no? Yes. She wrote. She's a woodworker.
It's a rainbow.
Sorry.
It's at we have a little summer cabin that was built in 1896. Very humble, but it's where we like to go when the weather is good. And it's on an island, in one of the big rivers in Ontario. And when I was starting into writing the book, she realized he needs quiet, and he needs a non-distracting view, and he needs a place. And so she looked in the back of the guest bedroom, and she thought, you could make a desk there that swings down out of the way when guests are here, but when they aren't, which is most of the time, you can swing it up, and it's got swing out legs. And she made it out of parallel pieces of wood, and then being an artist, she painted each piece of wood, beautiful colors, and did a great job. And it is a desk of many colors. And I sat at that desk and wrote the Apollo Murders. So yeah, absolutely, everything in the book is true.
Yes,
So,
I knew that. I was just kind of...
Especially the nation at the start.
Right. The Apollo Murders, Chris Hadfield, deals with flight crews from different nations. They collide on the moon. We won't get into why and how. But in real life, though, did you find space flight to be a cultural equalizer? Was there a natural camaraderie among astronauts, cosmonauts, such as that?
Yeah, I was NASA's director of operations in Russia and lived in Russia for about 5 years. And I trained in Japan. I trained at multiple places in Europe, trained in Canada, trained in multiple places in the United States. And it's 15 different nations on the International Space Station. So, yeah, it's a huge international venture. I learned to speak Russian starting in my 30s so that then I could, be a better astronaut and eventually have a chance to be the pilot of a Russian rocket ship and such. So yeah, it is by definition global and international, and much to its benefit, because each country goes through various cycles where they have an economic downturn or a political change, or they have a technological problem with their equipment. And if it's just one country trying to do it completely on their own, it's really hard to maintain momentum over multi-decades. Most programs like that fail. But by making it international, then you've all sort of got an international commitment, memorandum of understanding. So we couldn't have done it if we weren't international. And when you get to the actual crew level, the filter, Dennis, that selects astronauts is almost the same in every country of the world. And so the type of people that it chooses are very similar, and we have a lot in common. And we're different, and we're some are, folks are imperfect, of course, but that definitely supersedes just any sort of shallow definition of national politics. Because even, let's say you're an American astronaut, well, which political stripe do you like the best? Just because you're American doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to have a religious or political or philosophical agreement with your crewmate. So I think the type of selection process where you choose someone that you're going to trust and have the right character traits to go and stay off the Earth for 6 months, then that's more of a filter than nationality of birth.
And Chris Hadfield, the Apollo Murders, there's a section where the Apollo 18 ship in the book is being prepared for launch, and something called huffers are brought in. Now, what are they, and why do we need huffers? Or the Apollo 18, why did it need huffers?
The huffers are actually, huffers are just big air movers. Like if you watch football on a cold day and they bring that great big blower, it's like a long tube, and it blows hot air at one end. It's just sort of like an oversized version of those. And often particular types of engines, like in your car, they built in a starter. But if you think back to the Model T, you had to get out front and hand crank that engine just to get it turning over enough for the spark to start. Well, a huffer does that same thing. Instead of having a starter mounted on the engine, which means you'd have to carry the weight of that starter every time you wanted to fly your ship, whether it's an airplane or a spaceship, it's nicer if the huffer is on the ground that gets it started, and then the vehicle can be lighter. And so huffers are just big blowers, just big air blowers that you attach to your engine to get it spinning. And then once the engine is spinning, then it can run on its own. Then you can disconnect the huffer and you can turn yourself into a bird. So huffers are just a way of efficiently starting something that's going to fly.
And is it true that you're afraid of heights?
Oh, everybody should be afraid of heights. I mean, heights will kill you.
That's right.
I mean, that limits how tall you can be. Because if you fall down, I mean, why aren't we 12 feet tall? It's because if you fall from a standing height, you can just barely survive it on a hard surface. Like, it'll probably break a major bone, or maybe even break your skull, even though our skulls are pretty solid. And if we were twice as tall, you'd have a bunch more energy when you hit the ground. So falling is a big threat to life. And in truth, though, I'm not afraid of falling. I'm afraid of hitting the ground.
Right.
And so I'm not afraid of heights. I'm afraid of hitting the ground. If I know for certain that I can't hit the ground, then there's no reason to be afraid anymore. And so that's why, as a pilot, I have great respect for heights, but I recognize that I've got wings. And the wings don't care how high I am. Their job is actually to provide the lift that holds me up. Or if you're on a spaceship, you're orbiting the world effortlessly like the moon. You can't fall down. You're going to have to deliberately fire your engines to slow down so you can fall down. So yeah, I'm very respectful of heights, and I'm fearful of hitting the ground hard enough to do myself damage. So I work really hard to make sure that I don't.
That you don't. That's what we hear about people who fall and break a hip, or break a hip and then fall, and that's probably the worst thing that can happen to especially elderly people, falling and hitting the ground, like you say. Do rookie astronauts, is there a term for rookie astronauts?
Yeah, when you're new in the astronaut business, you're called an astronaut candidate, which makes sense, sounds fine, except when you go through the inevitable shortening of the English language, an astronaut candidate becomes ASCAN, and that's the more derogatory sounding term. So yeah, rookie astronauts are called ASCANs, and I was an ASCAN for a while, but eventually graduated through it, got my silver pin, and became an astronaut.
That's right. Somebody else, one of our buddies, wants to know, do you ever think of being a role model as a burden of sorts? Because I'm sure a lot of people look up to you as a role model.
Well, it depends why people are modeling themselves after your role, I guess. I mean, you should ask, everybody's a role model. It's just a matter of how many people you're influencing. I mean, when you look at someone walking down the street and you go, wow, that person has a really nice looking hat. I'd like to get that, that hat that they have there, or whatever, I don't know what sports team you favor, but in your case, a Habs hat.
That's right.
So that person, by their actions and choices and outward appearance, has inspired you to change who you are. Or you might look and go, wow, that is one ugly coat that person is on, or where did they get that haircut? And that will influence. Or, you might talk to someone for a while and go, I really like the way that person approaches this phase of life or something. And I'm going to try and be more like that person. Everybody is a role model to some degree. But when you become a public figure, where lots of people know who you are, then more and more people are going to tell you that you're going to think that your hat is ugly, or that what you're saying is worthwhile or not. So I find it as, number one, a tremendous compliment, in that a lot of people think that the things that I've done are worth emulating, or are honorable, or are valuable. And so that's a huge sort of compliment and reaffirmation of my own choices in life. But I also see it as a big responsibility. I have a bunch of schools named after me, and streets and things named after me, and I'm in the science textbooks in grade 5 and 6, depending which province you're in, and so there's all kinds of things that are publicly modeled after me. So it makes me think, I need to behave accordingly. And because I'm well known, then if I am small-minded and choose to behave like a jerk, then it's going to have more repercussions than if no one knew who you were. So people will talk about it. So I find mostly it's an enormous blessing, and I feel like I'm just perpetually at a family reunion where everybody's my second cousin. it's one of those family reunions where everybody's going, "Hey, how are you?" And you don't really know their name, but you sort of recognize their face, and they know who you are. Maybe a high school reunion or something, and you're like, "Hey, how are you?" But they're not mad at you, and they're kind of excited to meet you, and just fine. It's just another human being, and they are happy to be speaking with you. So just be nice, be respectful, and try and listen. And it means that I can't just go to the mall or something, or going out to a restaurant. A lot of people will know who I am. But when you trade it off all overall, it's it's fine, and it's opened a lot more doors than it is closed. So it's part of a public life, and I don't mind it at all.
Chris Hadfield has been with us. We have to wrap things up now. Looks like our time is pretty much up. The book out is The Apollo Murders by Chris Hadfield. A very nice and challenging book to read, and you'll learn a lot from it. So before we go, sir, what's next for you? What's up next?
Well, The Apollo Murders is already going into 13 different languages, I think. It's all over the world, so that's exciting. And we're in final discussions with a couple different production houses to bring The Apollo Murders to the screen. So that'll be fun, turning it into a movie or a TV movie or something, or maybe a TV series. So that's a fun development. And then I'm writing the next book in the series. So the Kaz and Svetlana and the characters in The Apollo Murders, this isn't the last you've seen of them. So I spent my whole morning, in fact, deep into the next book as I'm writing it. And it should be out in the spring of 23, so a little over a year from now. But then there's all the other projects I'm involved in, Dennis. It's a complex, fascinating, challenging time to be alive, just like always.
Just like always. Yes.
To shoulder, get through this particular phase. But I'm heavily involved right across the board in those things. And I really hope that everybody enjoys The Apollo Murders. The audio version of it is brilliant. The guy who did it, Ray Porter, it's great, I think, to listen to. And so, yeah, amongst all the other stuff that's going on in life, I'm really pleased to have been able to write The Apollo Murders, and very pleased to have spoken with you today, Dennis.
Thank you very much.
Can't put my feet up, can't hold my lunch down. Turning the sound up, I start to spin round. Can't stand on my own 2 feet, I just float away. I took a ride in the hot seat, now I'm ready to play far away. And I don't turn left, and I don't turn right, and I don't slow down anymore. And I don't climb up, and I can't fall down, and my feet are touching the floor. Around once more.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.